What's going on, everybody? It's John again, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. Coming up today, not only a good topic, but a whole hour of listening. So, here we go. Who is the most evil person you've ever met? Serious, not safe for work. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Not sure about the most, but my father is definitely up there. Spent my childhood with me and my mother and older brother being beaten. Then, when my brother got older and he was too big for my father to hit, he started putting my brother down, making him feel worthless, which led to him leaving at age 16. Then, my mother and I started getting the brunt of his moods, and there was nothing I could do about it because he was bigger than me. But then one day when I was 17, I realized that I was now bigger than him. I didn't hit him, but being able to finally shove him away from my mother made me feel like a horrible darkness had subsided. A pedo, so bad he'll never get out of prison. Throughout his life, got himself into positions of power, policeman, scout leader, etc. Even became a missionary overseas. The most manipulative man I've ever met, and fortunately, I was in my late teens, so didn't meet his criteria. He's not related to me, but is the grandfather of my nephew that he'll never meet. My ex-stepfather put my family through hell, abusive in every manner, a total piece of shit. He managed to flee the country before he was arrested. To this day, he's the only person I've ever met where I truly hope he dies a slow, agonizing, painful death. And that's all I'm going to say about that. One of our regular customers at the grocery store where I used to work at was a big hulking black guy with gray dreads, really cold guy, never smiled. You'd try to engage in small talk with him at the checkout and you'd get nothing back. It turned out later he turned his family into a kind of cult. He had multiple kids with his own daughters and nieces. When the cops came to his house to take the kids away from him, he barricaded himself inside and killed 9 of his kids. Just an absolutely evil man. I have worked as a correctional officer, peace officer, law student in criminal defense, and as a prosecutor. My key takeaway from these experiences is that few people are straight up evil in some biblical sense, and because they are so rare, it's actually quite terrifying when these types crop up. Even the vast majority of people who have committed terrible crimes are simply messed up people who have endured lives full of abuse and suffering and normalization of violence and criminality. People who didn't have a chance to be productive and law-abiding citizens and who love others and are loved in spite of their issues. An example of one of the truly evil types, though, is an abuser in an intimate partner violence file we had, who would use weighted gloves to methodically beat his girlfriend in accordance with a calculated schedule so she wouldn't have visible bruises when she went out, who would rub his penis against his girlfriend's face to mark his territory before letting her leave their residence, and who fired off a handgun round beside her head while holding her hair and then made a necklace out of the bullet casing for her so she'd always be reminded of what he was capable of. That was calculated violence and cruelty to a rare extreme. Usually such things are impulsive and people get carried away and regret things at least. Went to school with a complete psychopath. Think Anders Breivik. He was basically his clone in terms of both looks and certain views. He was pro-child abuse and child pornography. Thought women should stay in the house and should serve men. Wanted gay people, black people, Jews, fat people, ugly people, etc. all eradicated and essentially have his Aryan race. Produced his own homemade weapons. He had tasers, knives, some sort of weird gun that shot glass pellets that would shatter on impact for malicious injuries, etc. and knew how to make explosives too. Was just the biggest see you next Tuesday you could imagine in general. Enjoyed bullying people and acted like such an annoying dick to everyone all the time, and you could tell he got so much pleasure out of it, he'd almost have an orgasm face when bullying or hitting people. Also, was involved in loads of weird things like hacking and nudism and crypto, back in the days where nobody knew what Bitcoin was. To this day, I'm amazed how I've not heard his name connected with some terrorist attack, murder, rape, child abuse incident. He was just the most despicable, evil, horrible bastard I've ever met. I've spent a long time working with young offenders, I've also spent 4 years working in a children's home. All in, I think I've worked with about 10 children who went on to commit murder. I've also worked with countless sex offenders. Only 2, would I say, were truly evil. One lad I worked with in a children's home took a real disliking to me, was always making threats to kill me. Not that unusual in this line of work and something I would normally shrug off, but this lad, I believed he meant it. Thankfully, he was moved on quite quickly. A few years later, this teenage girl went missing. Turns out she was his girlfriend at the time. As soon as I heard this, I knew he had killed her. Turns out he did some pretty horrific stuff to her before murdering her. I won't go into detail. My former boss. The woman paid us minimum wage and a commission schedule that was almost impossible to achieve, and she was thinking of changing it to make it harder with no benefits. In the 5 months I worked there, I saw her berate my coworkers constantly. She tried to bully one woman into postponing her surgery because we would be short-staffed, and while that coworker was on medical leave, unpaid, she screamed at my other coworker at the top of her lungs. I'm not exaggerating when I say the windows effing shook while she was screaming. Between the pittance she paid and the way she treated her staff, I'm convinced that she would own slaves if it were legal. When it came time for me to GTFO of Dodge, I had the foresight to print my commission sheet for the month. I gave her 3 weeks notice and she fired me on the spot. I asked about my commission and she outright refused to pay it. Commissions are protected wage in my state. I made sure to check the law before I quit, so I told her I already had my commission sheet and would be filing a wage complaint with the state. She confronted me at the door and told me she would sue me if I left with client information. I told her good luck with that and walked out. Oh, and she purposely didn't file my unemployment paperwork, so I had to go to the UI office directly and force it through. That backfired on her spectacularly, as they gave me a full 6-month benefit period. Technically, I was only entitled to 3 weeks. They also sent a caseworker to her office twice looking for her and my money, so I eventually got that check. Edit. I forgot to add, she committed insurance fraud at least once while I was there. Life insurance policies under a certain dollar amount don't require a physical, just a phone screen. I saw her coach a client who admitted to being a smoker and to lying on the phone screen. My mom had an awful ex-boyfriend after she divorced my dad. He used to hit her, and once he came round to our house where me and my 4 brothers and sisters, all very little at the time, lived, and threw a brick through our window. After she left him, he used to stare out the window at me when I walked to school and shout really gross things at me. I'd never done anything to this man ever. One time I was in town after school with my friends, and he saw me and shouted "slut" at me. I flipped him the finger and walked off. He called my school and told them I'd given him the finger whilst in the middle of a uniform. I got called into the head's office the next day. She was known to be very strict and formidable and really scary. I told her what happened and how he was constantly harassing me, and this stern, super posh old lady said, "Good for you. If he comes near you again, let me know and we'll call the police together." I was stunned because I was terrified of her. God was evil. Good for you for doing all the legwork to make sure that your back was covered. You'd hope that a woman like that would learn her lesson, but I doubt she will. Didn't meet the guy, but watched his sentencing. This is like one of those Law & Order episodes that starts as one type of case and turns into something totally different. A woman's dog is sick, so she takes him to a vet. The vet gives the dog medicine, which doesn't work, and the dog gets sicker. So she goes to a second vet, who gives her the right diagnosis and wants to know why she didn't take the dog to a vet sooner. "I did," the woman says. "I took him to Dr. Smith in Somethingville." "Smith in Somethingville," the vet says. "He lost his license to practice years ago." So the woman calls the cops, and because Smith is working out of a mobile clinic, the cops get a warrant for his house as well. They raid it, looking for medications that people can't have unless they're a vet, or had the meds prescribed to their animal by a vet. They go through every inch of the house, including the boxes in his attic. The boxes in the attic hold at least 2 decades of child pornography that Smith produced, featuring the abuse of boys who appear to be around 8 to 11. The veterinarian stuff is not the least of Smith's problem. He pleads guilty, but hopes that his lack of any prior trouble with the law will get him sentenced to probation or house arrest. "Mr. Smith," the judge says, "you had box after box of child pornography that you created up in your attic." "Well, I save a lot of old stuff, Your Honor," Smith says with a straight face. "Old textbooks, old yearbooks." The judge sentences him to something like 18 years with a minimum of 10. As Smith is being led from the courtroom, his mother, age 70-something, calls out, "Stay strong, Bill." Nowhere near as bad as I'm sure some people will be posting about, but the single worst person I've ever personally met was a fellow counselor at a summer camp I've worked at. The guy would go out of his way to say shitty things to other counselors, or even other campers, especially the teens. This dude was probably like early 20s, and he would humiliate anyone he thought of as inferior to him, which was basically anyone that didn't have direct authority over him that wasn't his friend. He specifically made several teenage girls cry. Oh, also this summer camp was for people with disabilities, so keep that in mind. One night in particular, a few of the counselors were hanging out outside before heading to bed, and he comes walking by with a flashlight. Someone asks him to be careful with the flashlight as they were light sensitive. You know when you walk out of a dark building into the sunlight and everything's ridiculously bright for a few seconds? Imagine that, but it doesn't go away. His response was, "You mean like this?" and shined it directly at all of us. Later in the summer, someone who was this guy's friend started working at the camp. This new guy had been working here previous years and was normally quite good, so I suggested pairing them up, thinking the new guy would bring the shithead up to his level. That didn't happen. Instead, shithead brought the new guy down to his level, and they both made each other worse. I remember one day off when we went to town, they both just started going off on me during the ride over. I don't remember what was said, but it was probably generic shit about how I was a pussy or whatever. Worst person ever? No, definitely not. But the dude was just an asshole all the time, for no reason other than to make himself feel superior. Also, the guy was an athlete, so of course if you were ever to try to put him in his place, that wasn't going to happen. F you, Greg. My own mother. I could go on and on and on about her and some of the shit she's done, but to simplify a long, twisted tale, I'll just tell a couple short excerpts from my life. When my recently deceased dad was dying of stage 4 lymphoma and various other cancers, he developed as the lymphoma metastasized into other organs and bones. She openly and spitefully told my sister that she couldn't wait for my father to die so she didn't have to deal with him being sick anymore and taking care of him. Which was bullshit anyways, because she was making him drive himself 2 hours both ways to chemo and radiation therapy. And when he'd inevitably start vomiting, she would make him clean it up while still puking because she would not. On top of that, the man worked until the day he died, while she refused to even consider getting a job so he could rest. She also took his recliner and shunted it out into the garage in Michigan. And no, it was not suitable for human habitation. It had no air conditioning or heating, and it was filled with storage and her car he bought. And now that she's got her wish and he's passed away, she's constantly posting on Facebook about how hard it is to lose the person who you spent your whole life with and how much she wishes it was her instead, blah blah blah. The man spent 35 plus years with her, working a minimum of 40 hours a week to take care of her and us kids so she could be a stay-at-home mom, where all she did was eat junk food, take naps, and watch trash TV. Her kids took care of the 20-acre farm, all the housework, dishes, laundry, dinner, everything. My mother didn't lift a single finger to do anything that didn't directly benefit her, unless it absolutely had to be her, for almost the entire 35 plus years. And when my dad needed her to step up, she refused, and instead made his last couple years a misery. She was and is basically the queen of the Karens. One of my school bullies, the guy would mock and bully disabled people who wasn't his family, except his dad. He harassed me and other vulnerable persons, physically beat people in the bathrooms, including me. He always had 2 other people with him. He would use his charming looks and personality to manipulate people into believing him. He had everyone convinced he was a good guy. He would slut around with a number of girls and hurt them mentally. Whenever they spoke out against this kind of monster, he would threaten them. No one believed him anyways, surprisingly. He would continue to hurt people mentally and physically until May this year. He's facing rape charges and assault charges and sexual assault on a minor. He was 19 and raped a 15-year-old. A trial hasn't been set yet, but the girl had a lung punctured and scars from fighting back. He eventually gave in and ran away, but it was too late. The girl was traumatized. He had scars and bruises from punching her. The girl was sent to the ER and was hospitalized for a week. My own friends defended him, so I longer consider them friends and block them. But this guy was so manipulative and charming, people still believe he wouldn't do such a thing. This guy is a true monster. This might be all over the place because it's only little stories that I've heard only once. My grandfather. He was a trucker, and he was 19 and my grandmother was 14. She got pregnant with my mom. He never wanted to change my mom's diapers as a baby because she's a girl. But when my mom turned 3, he took her on a 3-month trucking trip with his brother, making no sense because he never wanted to bathe her or change her diaper, making his brother do the things he did unspeakable things to her, and my grandfather just let it happen. We aren't quite sure yet, but we think he pimped my grandmother out during those 3 months so she couldn't do anything to help. My mom has no recollection of those 3 months because of trauma, just very faint memories leading up to and after it happened. When my mom was 15, he would call her a slut and tell her that she was going to grow up to be a slut. So he had her hymen checked. Note that hymens can break just by falling down. Never once thought about him being that type of person, but as I've gotten older and listened to my mom's stories, which no one has ever believed, I've realized that he's an effing evil person, and it makes me sick that he acts like nothing happened. I don't know about evil, but this person was definitely shitty. I ended up losing my vision a little over 4 years ago. I went through hard times and the grieving process and finally found myself wanting to put myself back out there and start dating. We went on 2 dates, and then on my 3rd, we ended up sleeping together. I usually wait long enough into a relationship where some type of feelings start to develop, but I went ahead and slept with her anyway. The next day, everything was going fine until asking about getting together again. She quickly replied and said that she didn't want to date and just wanted to know what it would be like to sleep with a guy that was blind. This really threw me off, and I cannot fathom this being true just out of the hopes that there weren't people that dumb and shitty. I was hoping more so that she wouldn't have enjoyed the sex, but told me that it was good. I ended up blocking her out of disgust and for wasting my time. I worked for many years at a prison residential work furlough program. We got mostly non-violent offenders, except for the occasional involuntary manslaughter. That said, I met some sociopaths who were only in for the crimes for which they were caught, not their real crimes. It's pretty scary to encounter one, and I got skilled at spotting them. One of our inmates was a woman who was actually quite famous for her crimes, thief, because of the length of her career, her charm, and her sheer audacity, especially now, as she's this sweet little old lady. There have been a couple of documentaries about her, and a movie that I'm not sure is still in the works. Anyway, she's been painted as a folk hero, with some of her victims sort of flattered that she hit them, and she doesn't even press charges because of the publicity it brings them. When she arrived at our facility, she was treated like a queen by the other inmates, and had a few interviews from the local press. I tried to keep it contained, not because I had a problem with the press, but because everybody was a mark to this woman. She was so skilled at manipulation that she could get practically anyone to do anything for her. She kept asking me for special treatment, using the foot in the door technique. Google it. I wasn't buying it. She always had tons of cash, donations from her admirers, and would ask me to hold it, bribe for her. I refused. She would laugh every time I told her no because she was sure she could break me. She even said it. What she didn't know was I grew up with a sociopath sister, so I knew all the tricks. One day, she asked me for a very big favor and I said no. Most people with her brand of sociopathy know when to cut bait and move on to the next mark. They don't hold grudges because they don't have room in their brains to think about anyone other than themselves. But this time, the look in her eyes chilled me to my bones. I don't rattle easily. I think my ADHD ASD is protective for me in that way. But I seriously thought at that time, this woman will gut me and not think twice about it. I've never been that scared before in my life, and I've seen some shit, y'all. I know that there's some dead bodies in this woman's past. She's not just a thief. I've told this story before, and people ask me about that look. Evil is the absence of humanity. It's empty and cold. That's what I saw in her eyes. Nothing. It was terrifying. I'm sure there are plenty of people out there with different kinks and fetishes, but it's still not right to take advantage of someone like that. Eye doctor we used to use years ago. He really stood out, not just gruff or dismissive, but really almost scary cold. I took my young son, and he was so young he was having trouble understanding the instructions like, look in here, be still, stare at the balloon, and all that stuff. Usually they have good ways to get kids to follow directions, and my son wasn't being difficult or refusing or anything. I could tell he just couldn't tell what the guy meant, like, hello, he's 4. He doesn't know left and right, for example. Anyway, the guy just stormed off and left us in there forever. I could open the door and see him just sitting at a desk, just staring, not doing anything, like he was punishing us because a 4-year-old didn't understand directions. It was the weirdest experience I ever had with any medical professional. Then, a few months later, we see on the news that guy murdered somebody. He was mad at this guy for business reasons, so he went to his house to kill him. He wasn't home yet, so he shot his girlfriend, let her lie there slowly bleeding to death for hours. She lived at first, but died at the hospital, then ambushed the guy when he got home, who wrestled the gun away from him and lived. Then the police found his hit list of other people he planned on killing. This was not one of those, he was such a quiet guy, who would have predicted type of situations. It was more of a, yeah, can't say I'm surprised. It really showed with this guy. Used to work for a chained grocery store on the East Coast. The stores would always ask for donations to some cancer charity. The donation money never went to the charity and ended up going to one of the executives to buy himself a new swimming pool at his mansion. Nothing was ever done about it, and the guy ended up passing away from some rare disease, amyloidosis. Seems rather evil to trick people like that. A stranger passing by in a northern Michigan tourist destination a few years back. Well, at least I swear something was off about this man. I'd had my dog for almost a decade at the time, sweetest, most docile dog I'd ever encountered. He made friends with every human he met, would go belly up for a dog quarter of his own size, and who I had never even heard growl, and have it again since this day. Well, in a crowded sidewalk area, an older couple passed by, and as the woman bent down to pet him, he seemed to laser focus on the man standing a few inches back, growling and pinning his ears at this man. Of course, I immediately restrained my dog, but he still growled and barked, his whole body shaking the entire time this man was in eyesight. Watching him as he passed, Pup didn't relax again until the man could no longer be seen from where we stood. To this day, he's never had any reaction, even anything like that to anyone. It really freaked me out, and I think about it often. I still wonder if Pup was picking up on something that we humans couldn't see. Depends on one's definition of evil. I didn't get to meet the people responsible, fortunately for them, but my first ever girlfriend was sexually assaulted a couple of years after we broke up, and a strange combination of red mist, anger, and compassion for her came over me. Fortunately for me, I was able to focus a significant portion of my emotional response to her and helping in her recovery and enabling her to return to her life and chosen path. I knew that she and I were never going to be together as a couple, but I wanted to make sure that I could do everything possible to help her because, in short, I'm not an asshole. Her attackers, 2 men, were fortunately found guilty at court and were sentenced to spend several years in prison. I worked for a guy that worked as a subcontractor for a company that rhymed with Balluriton. We rented land from a 90-year-old farmer that still raised bulls to sell. We dumped oilified waste on that property and ended up noticing that cows getting sick and dying. Was more expensive to properly dispose of it. They'd step over $1 billion to save a dime. The business was a shell of a shell company. If anything happened, oh no, Halliburton, how dare you, oops, you excavation services? Nah, we cleaned up oilified waste and disposed it in the absolute cheapest way possible. My boss was the most ruthless person I'd ever met, willing to do literally anything to make or save a single dollar. My ex was a narcissist who raped me when we were engaged. I was told that this was my fault. Things were okay while he was in the army. It sort of kept him in check. But after he left, the abuse got worse, and in particular, he made a habit of assaulting women. I watched as his parents paid one lawyer after another to erase the several cases of assault allegations made against him by his fellow graduate school attendees. I was blamed for these situations, as if somehow was responsible for his decision to cheat on me and assault other women. No one questioned why this continued to happen. It was just chalked up to racism, despite the fact that these exact situations had previously happened in both college and in the army. His family chose to stay blind to his behavior, and he chose to disguise these acts by blaming the women and insisting they had instead assaulted him. I had to break it to an old friend of mine how he had told everyone for years that she had assaulted him in college. I can't even begin to imagine how horrified she must have been when I finally told her this, but I knew. He had chosen his graduate school because it was in a racist area, so each time someone would complain about his inappropriate behavior, he would retort that he was simply the victim of racism. Mind you, I'm not saying the area wasn't racist, which is why his decision to attend school there was brilliant. It gave him a front to continue assaulting women, all of whom were white women, just to better play into the racism scenario he was creating, and a reasonable excuse when he was caught. He was cleared of both Title IX charges, and I watched the thrill he took in preparing himself against these cases, in the constant rehearsing and victimized act he perpetuated. I swear the shit turned him on, and he sought it out, and I watched as these women took increasing doses of medication, moved far away to stay safe, and one even legally changed her name. Oh, and my job was to listen to him plan out how to get out of these situations without having any feelings about the fact that he continued to step out on me while I wasn't so much as allowed to have casual conversations with other men in public. But the scariest part was watching him fantasize and plan how he was going to get his revenge on the people who had reported him. That was downright terrifying, because he had a specific gleeful look on his face when planning how to F over the people who had simply called out his abuses. His energy would change, and a mixture of evil and excitement barely contained would come to the surface, and it was some sort of Disney villain behavior. There was an evil laugh and everything. I've never seen another person enjoy the planning and perpetuating of hurting others on purpose, and this truly terrified me. And mind you, this isn't the I need to be successful, accomplish more kind of revenge. He chose to also put himself in the role with me. When I tried to leave or threatened to call the cops on him, he would again ask me how I could justifiably call the cops on my black husband. Mind you, he's being abusive in some capacity every day at this point in time. The cops in town were so used to his ridiculous antics, e.g. breaking into our apartment through the window when I was sleeping, that when he called them after having knocked me out unconscious, no one bothered to follow up with me. Apparently, I was able to give myself 2 black eyes and a concussion all on my own. I finally left because I realized I would die if I did not. His dad's main focus upon finding out I had left was to threaten me with having the car reported stolen if I did not return it. I hadn't been allowed to buy my own car when we were together. No one reached out to me to ask for my side of the story or to make sure I was okay. I immediately became public enemy number 1, and the only goal was to ensure that he wouldn't have to pay me any money. He, in fact, asked me to pay him support, mere months away from finishing his PhD in an engineering field. He played the victim in front of the judge, and the judge even left a note in the court notes about how he was one of the most intelligent men to have ever been in the courtroom. I'm grateful to have gotten away, but this man is a predator who has found a script that works and who will continue to use it to assault women and then hide behind the victim persona. His family will continue to shell out money as long as he's out of prison, but then I think he's too good at this game to ever have to face any consequences. The former president of a small company I used to work at, she fired a young woman because she had a heart condition that caused her to take multiple days off at the time. She almost fired another coworker of mine because she was also going to be taking some time off to help her mom, who had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer. My manager convinced her not to, though. She did, however, allow a racist woman to continue to work at the company despite having had various complaints against her. This woman always made racist remarks about the Latino workers there and called a black woman the N-word with that hard R. She victim blamed me when my boss was bullying me and told my coworkers I was off my rocker. I've been clinically diagnosed with mental illness, so that hurt. She was surprised why no one wanted to show up to her retirement party. Thank God that BITCH is gone, even though I don't work there anymore. I mean, this is just a horrible situation, and you would think that someone like that should be brought into the light. Otherwise, you might be looked at as some type of accomplice for some of this if you knew about it. It's tough, I'm sorry. Bad guy. I'm still young, but there was this guy at my school back when I was 10 to 13. He ruined my life. He was a bigger kid, around 13 to 14, so let's name him John. Hi. I've known him before since he moved schools with me. John and one other person, let's name the other person Mark. We were kind of in a friend group. After a year or so, Mark got kicked from the school, and for that year, John would hit me a lot, and he was an awful person, but he was my only friend. After Mark got kicked, that gave John the space to bully me even more. He called me a whore. He manipulated me into thinking my only other friend was awful. He beat me up every single day. But it's not like he was weak. No, he was an effing boxer. I remember one day I came up to him since we were friends and told him that I've built up my pain tolerance to the point where he would be able to beat me up and I wouldn't scream. So we went in a more private area and he started punching me and kicking me. After about 30 seconds, I just whispered a small, quiet, ouch. He started yelling and screaming at me. I didn't find it weird at the time. He would do so many other things, and I've changed schools, but I'm still afraid. Whenever anyone raises their arm, I duck, and I fill up with anxiety. Whenever I'm late to school, I expect seeing him, John, there, and I expect to be made fun of. John just started making my mental health worse. It's so awful by now. An old friend of mine got into drug dealing as a teen and steadily grew in power into adulthood. I had heard he was behind some deaths and beatings, at times personally doing it and other things ordering it. Dude could turn from cool to enraged in an instant, and he never regretted anything he did. He was super brutal. Around me, he would essentially revert to himself when we were best friends from the ages of 9 to 11. I remember once I ran into him at a local bar or restaurant and he lit up, asked me to go to the arcade nearby to play games on him, so I obliged. I'll never forget a couple of his goons joining us, just standing around as we played games, and one of them came over with some news, and my old friend turned red and shouted, "I don't care, handle it, I'm playing effing games." Dude could turn a whole room cold and make everyone stop laughing with a glare. It was spooky, especially having known him before he became that person. He was shot to death with an Uzi by a guy on a motorcycle passing by at a local bar. They never found the shooter, and it was a suspected professional hit. I worked a traveling art show for a couple of days. The brother of a friend and his friend showed up to work the same gig. His brother was a racist neo-Nazi. I had seen him way up in the mountains on a back road assembling a cross to burn. After the gig, they offered me a ride back. Their car was full of guns. They insisted on overstaying at the hotel and getting up at 4 a.m. to avoid paying another day. They drank and did speed and moved their bags of guns around and talked smack and in general psychopaths, saying they'd kill me in my sleep, shoot the desk clerk, etc. 4 a.m. we checked out. Don't remember if I slept a wink. Heard they both got sent to prison for many years for separate incidents shortly thereafter. My sister's recently ex-boyfriend is a huge narcissist, and after stabbing himself in the leg as a manipulation tactic, my sister left him and filed a restraining order. Somehow he managed to steal all of my sister's stuff, including our deceased grandpa's sweatshirt that got given to my sister, and took her dog's ashes as well. He managed to do all this, avoiding even going to her house because he paid somebody else to, showed up on the Ring camera. He did this to avoid any evidence. He keeps texting and calling my sister in hopes to have her talk to him, which would then void the restraining order. He got in with somebody at her work and had him tell her that he's closer than you think. All of this has made my sister genuinely fear for her life, so she moved back in with our parents. Old best friend, the most manipulative, narcissistic piece of shit I've ever heard of. created an entire different life to tell people so they'd feel bad for him. Just a few of the endless lies he made. He found his mom after she blew her head off with a shotgun. She's alive, and he lived with her. His brother died in war. He's alive and 20 minutes away. Never been in the military. His dog was his dead brother's military dog. You could tell the thing was from a shelter. He was from Amsterdam. He's from New Brunswick. He escaped Amsterdam to avoid a life of drugs and crime. He was a middle-class nerd kid who never touched a cigarette before cursing us with his presence. Claimed he could speak fluent Dutch. Refused to recite a single word. His dad was abusive, and he knocked his dad out endless times. You could just tell his dad would fold him like a pretzel. Told everyone he had a handgun and was not to be effed with, and would carry it with him. It was a broken pellet gun. Claimed he took MMA for years, got his ass kicked by a crackhead. Claimed he was family with Bloods and Crips. Repped both bandanas on different days, don't know how he's alive. Said he knew people who would kill with a phone call. Nobody ever pulled up when we tried forcing him to. Said he had a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers. Refused to prove it. Claimed he had a safe house in the capital city of where we lived full of drugs and guns that he'd smuggled and distribute. Wouldn't show us photos or evidence of profits. Would have to ask his mom for pizza money. Would get people jumped by random Fs who were double our age, and tried playing hero by saying he had no part and convinced them not to kill the person. That's just a small percentage of the shit he'd spent hours of his days trying to convince people were true. I could easily remember 20 more if I thought harder. I'm not sure about most evil. My fiance's mom is a pure narcissist who gaslights my fiance because she won't come over to see her grandson because I'm here. She hates my guts and takes it out on my fiance, and has recently started to say disrespectful things about me to my son. He's 10 months old, so he won't remember any of it, but my fiance has been aware of it, and after numerous times of telling her to stop, finally snapped at her, and has essentially cut her out because she just won't stop pulling this shit. Constantly blaming my fiance or I for her inability to see her grandson when nobody was stopping her from doing so. Well, now she's barred from attending his first birthday party, and I'm quite tired of living rent-free in her head, so it seems like she will be out of all three of our lives for the foreseeable future. The stepdad of one of my former friends. He spent the entirety of our teen years sexually abusing and mentally emotionally manipulating her, as well as a number of other minors. Her boyfriend at the time was good friends with my boyfriend at the time, which is how we met, and I spent months working with her boyfriend to safely extract her from the situation and help her get to a point where she would and could cut off contact with her parents. Her mother knew and was also being abused by him. This dude had laptops full of child porn. He and his wife filmed, featuring my friend and others. I knew something was off about him the first time we met, but I couldn't have imagined how evil and vile he was, living such a seemingly normal life. We were able to get her out eventually, but not before he had hired a private investigator to slander the boyfriend, stalked me on numerous occasions when I both were and wasn't with her, stole my friend's car while she was in class at university an hour from his home, and tried to get her boyfriend arrested for showing up at their property to get her. He and her mother took her phone and texted us as her, trying to throw off the trail, and unfortunately found out when I had smuggled her a burner phone at one point. The local sheriff's office did get involved, but they bungled the case in a horrifyingly disappointing way. To this day, I'm convinced he somehow manipulated the cops into letting him go free. It makes my blood boil to think about. Unfortunately, I had a falling out with this friend when I broke up with my ex and moved to a new state. She didn't take the news of moving well, even though I vowed to visit and remain close to her at the time. Our extremely intense friendship ended on a sad note, but I think about her often and wish her well from afar. I looked him up on Facebook earlier this year, and I learned that her stepdad died of cancer a few years ago. There was a GoFundMe set up for his funeral costs, and the final update stated that he was buried in his favorite Mickey Mouse shirt with other toys and Disney paraphernalia. Ugh, effing pedophile, even in death. I don't generally celebrate the news of anyone's passing, but I went to sleep very happy the night I discovered he was dead, knowing he was no longer able to harm my former friend or anyone else ever again. I hope he suffered until the end. Edit. To add, I feel conflicted and uncomfortable sharing any part of her story, as it doesn't really feel like it's mine to tell, even if it did impact and involve me. But I wanted to share it as a reminder that sometimes evil really does sully everyday things and lives inside normal people with nice houses and wives and stepkids. People who have friends and community members that mourn them and fulfill their GoFundMes when they die. But they're still evil. They're doing unspeakable, inexcusable harm behind closed doors, and too often they get away with it. Sometimes when people feel off, it's best to trust your gut instinct and do whatever the F you can to quash the impacts of that evil. I'll never forgive that vile human for what he did, but I also could never have forgiven myself if I didn't do everything I could to get her out. Don't be silent just because everyone else is. My husband's ex abused and manipulated him for years, isolated him from everyone around him, cheated on him several times, including with a 14-year-old, shoplifted using the kids, physically abused their kids, specifically their autistic 5-year-old, mostly because he looked like his dad, drank while pregnant because she was going to leave the boys with their dad when she left, got buddy-buddy with his chain of command and convinced them he abused her and the kids because he filed divorce papers, which ended with him having his military career taken from him. When that didn't move fast enough, she went to the local police and had him arrested the day of their custody trial, left him thousands in credit card debt, doesn't pay child support, lies to people that she has custody, sees the kids supervised maybe once every 3 months, and is pregnant with another kid, while she's been smoking weed while pregnant and works on the base at the child care center. It's just a string of shitty, manipulative, and consistently crappy things that just gets to me. Definitely not the worst in this thread, but I never forgot her. She was my only friend in elementary school. I grew up with several undiagnosed mental illnesses that made it hard to socialize and be like other kids in general. She picked me out of the crowd somehow, and suddenly I had a best friend. She'd throw me under the bus constantly. People started rumors about me, and she'd laugh with them to my face, then act like nothing happened the next day. One time, she began to push me for seemingly no reason, so I grabbed her hands to make her stop. She suddenly begins crying loudly, and everyone comes to her defense, including our teacher, who told me, "Why don't you back off? I think you did enough for today." I was kept alone in the classroom during lunchtime, and when everyone came back, there was a rumor that I had tried to choke her to death. I tried to tell everyone I just held on to her hands, but no one believed me. And in the middle of the crowd, she was there, not saying a word, taking in all the love and attention from the class. I somehow finally came to my senses. We were 8. She invited me for a sleepover at her place, where we'd watch Pirates of the Caribbean, the third one I think, and just chill. At one point during the movie, she tells me I could rest my head on her if I felt tired. I did just that towards the middle end of the movie, and she shrugged me off of her. I asked why she did that, and she said, "I never said you could put your head on me. If you do this again, I'll stab you." And I laughed awkwardly, thinking she was joking or something. She said, "I'm serious. There's a knife in the kitchen I stole from my mom. It's under the fridge. If you touch me again, I'll kill you." I kept silent until her mom sent us to bed. Curiosity got the best of me in the middle of the night, so I went to the kitchen to see if she was bluffing or not. Sure enough, there was a massive steak knife just under her fridge. I moved from her home country shortly after that and never saw her again. Last I know, she's been tweeting about her best friend in the world who went missing and how much she misses me. Once again, enjoying all the attention from anyone who cares to give it. Raquel, you were my first definition of evil. Well, she sounds like a lovely human being, using kids to commit petty crimes and then beating them. Real winner. I don't know which path he was, psycho or socio, but there was this one factory that I had a repair maintenance contract with. He worked there and was like the nephew of the head of the union. Basically, couldn't be fired. Total piece of human garbage. Would smash up his equipment, would scream racist shit at people, always found any possible way to not do any work. Wouldn't even clean up his work area. Never stopped talking about how everyone was awful except Trump. It was always a challenge to figure out what he broke. also stole stuff. He wanted 2 fans because one wasn't enough, so he grabbed it from a non-union section of the building workers and dared them to fire him. I read once that roll form operators have the highest divorce rate of any profession, and yeah, I think of him and it makes sense. So when I was 7 to 10 years old, I had a tube which fed me because I had idiopathic gastroparesis, and I couldn't eat or could barely eat, and they put me under anesthesia to bring it in and changing it also, but this one person pulled it out and they had to put it back in. Well, we were not in a hospital, so they put it in without any painkillers, and it was a lot of pain, and that kid was just standing there. A few months later, he pulled it out again. I don't know if he was so dumb to forget or liked the look of me suffering, but that must have been the most evil person I've ever met, and hopefully he will be the most evil person I will have met when I'm done with my life. I feel like I have to vent about this because I've never really talked about, even though it's even about me. I was in middle, and I was talking to 2 guys outside the school. One of them, we'll call him Steven, was one of the most adorable persons I've ever met. Really nice and kind guy, but unfortunately due to his nature and the fact that he wasn't very tall, he tended to be bullied a bit, but he was always chill about this. The other guy, we'll call him Oliver, was Steven's best friend. They were literally always together, but a notable fact was that he was really tall, so he was pretty liked in the school. So, it began with Steven telling me and Oliver he thought about his feelings recently, and that he had a crush on one of our classmates, another guy. So, he told us he was probably gay, but didn't us to tell anyone about this, obviously. 3 days later, I'm entering class as any usual day, seeing Steven crying on his desk. Everyone else is laughing, including Oliver. They kept telling Steven he was gay from having a crush on one of the guys in the class. I asked Oliver about it to ask if he knew everyone learned about this. He simply answered, he was the one who did it, and it's just a prank, he said. Steven had to take the harassment for 2 months before changing schools with probably a trauma. Oliver never got anything. I rarely hate anyone, mainly because I tend to forgive a lot of things easily, especially when it's about me, but I'll always remember what Oliver, and I'll always hate him for it, till the day I die. I mean, this sounds pretty serious. You would think that you would be looked after by school staff or something, and not have it happen twice, let alone once. My 3 cousins went to a dentist that they found really unsettling but couldn't pinpoint why. Fast forward a while, my older cousin of the 3 was working as an ER receptionist a few years back when a patient was rushed in very close to death after a dental appointment. My cousin found out quickly he'd come in from their old dentist for a standard tooth removal, I think 2 teeth that should have taken 30 minutes. He was in the back for 2 hours with his wife constantly checking in before she demanded to go back, and found the dentist had completely snapped and removed all of his teeth, and he was very near death after being under way longer than he should have. Still scares me to this day. I used to know a pimp human trafficker who bragged to me about beating 2 murder charges, offered me money for my girlfriend, and explained how he would drop off his girls in the woods when they didn't want to work anymore. It was heavily implied that they were no longer alive when he dropped them off. He later went on to kill his cousin, one of my best friends, in the exact same way he committed the first 2 murders. Currently, he's in a county jail, but not for any murder charges. Worst part is, I don't think he's the most evil person I've been around. He was just the most open about it. He was cold as hell and charismatic as F. Almost a perfect psychopath if he hadn't been such a severe addict. Kinda hard to believe story, but whatever. Anyway, so my family moved into the house I currently live at when I was 8 or 9 years old, and we ended up moving like 1 house down from this house that like 2 families lived in. And no, it wasn't a condo, townhouse, anything like that. It was just a normal sized house, but 2 different non-related families lived in it. The people who lived in the top were my neighbor's friends, who I ended up basically growing up with until he ended up moving away. Then the person living on the bottom was like a 50-year-old man with a teardrop tattoo by his eye. Me, being an innocent 9-year-old, I basically became friends with like some murder. I would go into his house every day, sometimes with my friend and sometimes alone. When I'd go there alone, he would always give me food, and I never knew why. Then one day, me and my friend went into his really suspicious room that wasn't even a room, more like a crawl space that just probably like 50 to 100 candles. He locked us in there for a couple hours and told us we had to play hide and seek. So we started looking around in this tiny 5-foot by 4-foot crawl space and see these bottles. They were medicine bottles, and next to it was the food I'd been eating. We both realized that it was some sort of poison and was knocking on the door and screaming to come out, which he didn't until my friends called the police after he pressed like some button. We did find out that he was poisoning me and that he'd killed 3 people before and has never been caught because of the fact that he shared a house that wasn't under his name and didn't have a car. He ended up in jail. My boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. Her and I were best friends from like middle school to freshman year of high school. Even though we were friends, she has just always been mean. She's called me ugly and would bully me about my hair, and she was just never nice. We stopped being friends at the end of freshman year, and she began dating my boyfriend sophomore year. They dated before we got together. Surprise, surprise, their relationship was super toxic, and their relationship was almost like 3 years. After they broke up, my boyfriend took a break from dating and eventually pursued me. Once this girl found out, she was fuming and jealous. She would try and paint a story that we were best friends and I broke girl code, even though we stopped being friends way before she ever dated him, and I literally have not spoken to her since I was 14. We began to date at 18. She did just so many crazy things. She'd call my boyfriend's phone from a no-caller ID. She'd cyberbully me, watch my every move, and is just a crazy evil bitch. I can't stand her, but at least it's a bit satisfying knowing she's writhing in agony over how happy we are, lol. So you start reading a story and you're like, oh, that sounds pretty bad, and then watch out for this guy, he's got a teardrop tattoo, you never know. They're like, whoa, trying to poison a kid. And then they get locked in a crawl space playing hide and seek, and then just crazy. I'm glad you made it out, and I'm glad that that person's in jail and away from people. My egg donor. After her and my father divorced, she got involved with a church that was involved in grooming, sexual abuse, mental abuse, amongst other criminal behaviors. She would abuse my brother and I in the name of God. Simple things would set her off. She had a significant lack of common sense, still does, but managed to know to hit under the clothes so that it would never show. For years, I tried to have some sort of relationship with her. In the end, I gave up. She would always deny what I had accused her of and told me I was making up things and imagining things. I'm now free of her. But the last thing that she said, of course, she knew I could be told. She told my father she was thankful to him for moving up the wedding, so she didn't look pregnant, and thanked him for not letting her abort me. The last thing she did that solidified my decision to abandon any hopes was when my brother passed this last December. She shut her phone off because she didn't want him to ruin her Christmas. Didn't make it to his memorial service because she didn't check her messages. Maybe not evil, but she used mental trauma and abuse to ruin 2 lives, the children she bore. My stepfather. He was a veteran and a psychopath. When I was 15, he murdered my mom and killed himself in our living room. Several years later, I found out that the Navy had left him in the Philippines after his alleged involvement with the murder of 2 women. No charges were ever pressed. They literally dishonorably discharged him and left him there. I found this out when a fellow Navy vet contacted my family to find him. We confirmed the allegations after a year of red tape. Let me be clear, he wasn't physically, domestically violent. He would do weird shit like obsess about Nat Geo video edits of animals killing each other, hide normal items around the house, and lose his shit if you accidentally found them, clock my mom's every time she left the house, and if she was off, he didn't speak to her for days. The worst part was, I hated him from the minute my mom started dating him. I told her something was very wrong with him. I told my family something was very, very wrong with him. No one listened. A few years ago, one of my dad's coworkers used to frequent my food cart because he lived in the same town. Nice guy, funny, played guitar, high energy for an old guy, and him and his wife would go camping all over the place. Well, he got arrested for downloading child porn off of a USPS computer. After that whole investigation, it turns out he made his own child porn. He apparently would go to these campsites and trade the shit with other assholes. Kid's life was ruined. His wife went off the deep end of denial and lost everything. At this point, he's probably dead. I had a boss who was new to our company. Before she started, somebody from her old company reached out to me on LinkedIn and said to find my way away from her. I asked what he meant, and he said she's a narcissistic psycho. I chalked it up to them not getting along. Boy, was I wrong. Her main goal quickly became to create a fiefdom, forcing people out of their roles and hiring on underqualified people whom she could mentor and turn into minions. I really liked my role and team, so I tried hard to play ball with her, tried to feed her ego and just do my job. She then started gaslighting me. She started with, "How come you haven't been promoted yet?" And, "Do you feel like people here like you?" This eventually led to her convincing me I was in the wrong career, and the sooner I found my calling, the better. This area of the business is related to other areas, so I was able to lean into a new role, but it never truly fit. A couple years later, a buddy who was still in the department called me and asked how I got along with my old boss better than everyone else. I laughed, and then he told me everybody who ends up directly under her ends up quitting or in therapy. 3 people had gone through divorces. She told me I should consider divorcing my wife because I'm clearly not happy, and 1 person tried to kill themselves. He said he knew HR was trying to build a case against her, but it would be a while. I then remembered the person who reached out to me before my now ex-boss started and reached out to him again to say he was right. This is where the truly evil part comes in. He told me he knew she drove people to commit suicide in the past and everything I dealt with was part of her plan, even her eventually being fired. My company would be the 5th Fortune 500 company she pulled that shit at. Her goal is to bully her way into a higher position than what she came in at, be asked to leave, but for nothing too egregious, and then collect severance while asking her new employer to make her whole so she doesn't miss out on the vesting stock. I've had bosses and worked with complete assholes, but never ever known somebody with such diabolical ulterior motives. Knew this kid who had some serious issues. He killed a few cats by throwing them off his building roof or window. He would play with fire, and one day ended up burning his cousin just because he once slashed the tires of a bunch of cars and broke their windshield for fun. And he's been arrested too many times. His mom died because of an overdose, and his dad wasn't in the picture since his mom didn't even know who he was, so he only was guardian because his grandma, who he treated like shit. He once locked her in her own room while he brought a girl over to F in the living room and left her there for 2 days. He also shot her with a BB gun for fun. Worst thing he did to her was beat her with a wrench when she refused to give him his GameCube. She was declared brain dead after a few days. Whoa. Poor woman suffered so much till her death, trying her best to raise him right. He right now is serving life with no parole. Reason I knew him was because he was one of my brother's classmates, and my mom figured they were friends, but my brother was terrified of him, and rightfully so. He never did anything bad to my brother, but always told him everything he used to do. An ex-friend from high school. It started during my sophomore year. She had a son due to being raped by her father, who will never get out of prison. During high school, she stole my money. I got it back. Turned to my friends against each other, causing them both to be suspended. Has told me her sob story of being raped and causing me to ran out of the classroom and have a breakdown. I have autism. She did try to turn me against one of my friends, and her plan failed completely. My teacher then told me everything about her, and I immediately stopped hanging out with her. I'm now 23, and I'm glad that I no longer am friends with her. My MK1 in the Coast Guard. Not entirely the worst, but the worst I've met so far. Cheated on his wife with a girl in Hawaii, domestic violence, bought a 14-year-old prostitute in the Marshall Islands, and could only be happy by picking on people lower ranked than him. He'd roam the halls looking for people to torture instead of doing actual work. At one point, he found an injured grease monkey doing computer work. asked to see his medical slip, and found out he could only lift a certain amount of weight due to a torn shoulder. So he would literally weigh shit, and if it was under a certain weight, he'd make him do it. Like, literally brought a scale to work to cause someone pain and watch them suffer. I reported the guy several times, but nothing ever came of it. Hated that guy's guts. My ex-teacher's daughter, we will call Beth. She molested a classmate or friend of mine. We'll call him Lewis for no reason, or at least not a genuine reason. She was the most entitled person in my high school. No one was up to her standards, and the teacher did nothing about it. Later in the semester, Beth was allegedly beaten up by Lewis, but everyone found out she lied. How? The complete dumbass was caught on camera entering the girl's bathroom and exiting with bruises. She defended herself by saying that he was waiting for her inside, but they checked the camera footage from before she was caught, and in the whole entire day, no one but her had entered. Mind you that the bathrooms in my school did not have any windows, so Lewis couldn't have entered from to the bathroom. So, Beth was basically effed by her own stupidity. Then they expelled her, plus my ex-teacher got fired because of all my classmates told the principal about how my teacher did nothing about the molesting from Beth to Lewis. Let's just say that principal told the literal owner of the school, and the owner was not happy. TL, DR. Bully girl that molested my friend gets her ass expelled by the stupidest person and gets her dad fired as well.